everyone, and welcome to Celebrating Cinema, a podcast for the love of cinema. I'm your host, Laura Gommans, and as always, you can support what we do by leaving a review and sharing your favorite episode with friends. On this episode, film critic Hugo Emmerzael is joined by academic Dan Hassler-Forrest for the next edition of Sign of the Times, the Celebrating Cinema spin-off where they take a film from this century, anything from art house to spectacular pulp, and ask how it reshaped cinema. Today, it's the Coen Brothers' No Country for Old Men. They get into how a film from 2007 captured the American dread that was coming, a slow slide into something hollow, and the way it refuses to give us the thing we came for, justice, resolution, and a logic that pays off. But first, a few things happening at Lab 111 in Amsterdam this week. Catch our retrospective of the French auteur Jacques Tati, with classics such as Trafic and Playtime. And don't miss The Journey, our program coinciding with Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, a run of great epic tales where the road is the story itself, not the destination. Here's Hugo and Dan.
Hello, everybody. I'm mostly... Hi, Dan.
Hey, hello again.
We're so fucking back, as they say.
Let's take it to the limit one more time.
Exactly. For the full context for our listeners, our previous podcast recording with Dan Hassler-Forrest was about the book that you published on the Fast and the Furious franchise, which immediately triggered a lot of great and grand ideas.
Yeah, it was so much fun to do that. We were like, we got to keep doing this.
Exactly. And then many things actually came out of that. It's a new film series here in Lab 111 in the new screening room, Otto e Mezzo 8.5, in which we have a program called Cine of the Times, or maybe Sign of the Times.
Yeah, let's say Sign. Yeah.
We write Cine because we have to relate it to cinema, but it is a Sign of the Times.
Yeah.
It's a program series in which we, much like in the same vein as Fast and the Furious, take films from the 21st century that somehow across the spectrum of lowbrow and highbrow speak about we live in a society. That's and right. What does it mean?
Yeah. Like movies that capture something that's really specific about our moment, right? And how we got there, so that either are prophetic about something that by now we've all realized, or that sort of touched on a thing that became a larger thing. And I guess it's our attempt to establish, or to maybe just to discuss with others, the like canon formation, right?
Exactly.
What are like the modern classics, and what are movies that would be great to put up on the big screen again and
also
talk about with a bunch of people and then watch them.
Ultimately, it's not that much only about ruminating society. It's just also a bunch of cinephiles having fun.
For sure.
As you're listening to this, we just had our first event on the first Fast and the Furious here in Lab 111.
Yeah.
And now we're picking it up with the second podcast, which is also leading up to our second event.
Yeah.
And today we're picking a film, and we have a huge list.
Yeah, we do this for years.
Yes, and it's only growing. But today we want to dive briefly into a film that was a very obvious pick, but not necessarily an easy choice for many reasons, and we'll get into that in a bit. But the film we'll be discussing and soon we'll be screening together in Lab 111 is No Country for Old Men, the 2007 film by the Coen Brothers.
Hell yes.
Exactly. Now, why did we pick this film, and why was it not an easy choice? Let's start maybe with the easy choice aspect, which is this is a film that is so ubiquitous, right?
It won a fucking Oscar, you know?
Exactly.
And it's like, there's something a little bit, icky about Oscar winners. It's like they've already been acclaimed. If you're kind of trying to put together a list of some of the movies that you think matter a lot to our times, it's almost like you skip the ones that have already been, that are already canonized.
So you don't like Argo? You don't like...
I don't like Argo. I don't like the one about the mute people. What's it called again?
Oh, God.
The Apple movie that won an Oscar. Coda. I don't like the one about all the people in Los Angeles accidentally meeting each other. Crash. It's
the
maybe
wrong
the
Crash.
worst ones. Yeah, I don't like Green Book. No, like accidentally they get it right, and they give the award to like a really, really good movie. They gave an award to Parasite, and they gave it to No Country for Old Men. I was just watching like the extra features on the Criterion Collection. It's also in the Criterion Collection, so it's also in that sense a canonized film. But it won Best Picture, it won Best Directors, it won Best Supporting Actor, and I think it won, I'm sure it won Best Adapted Screenplay.
Yeah.
So on one of the extra features, Josh Brolin jokes that it won 4 Oscars and those damn Coens took 3 of them. And Javier Bardem, of course, won the other one for his iconic role as Anton Chigurh. So it's a film that's like, I guess, at least for you and I, as like, you know, kind of snotty cinephiles, it's like, well, surely everybody knows that one already. But also, I think it's just one of those films that is on my heavy rotation list. It's like you can put it on any day of the year, and you'll be just like, damn, I'd forgotten how great this movie really is.
And that was literally the point of picking this film, but also to some degree the point of this series is, you know, some of these recent classics we take for granted. They are prize winners. They're on the IMDb top 250.
Yeah.
You think you know them because you saw them in 2007.
Yeah.
You've revisited them a couple of times. I think a lot of the existential considerations of Cormac McCarthy really flew over my head when I was young. So we both rewatched the film recently for this discussion and for our series in Lab 111.
I even read the book again. Yeah.
Oh my God, you see, this is why you are here, always well prepared. And I have to say that it for me was just such a great reminder that these films that you take for granted, you should actually not, because there's so many interesting things in them.
As with The Fast and the Furious, it's a movie that people also take for granted, but just in a different way, in the sense that you watch it and you don't really think about it. And I think like having like a discussion about how that movie started this whole franchise and how it kind of shifted the way we look at serialization, casts it in a different light. I think by the same token, like No Country for Old Men is a film that's also in its own way kind of like, you know, maybe a highbrow genre film, but still very much a genre film, and one that is so enjoyable that we also kind of forget to think about it really while we're watching it. And so if you like rewatching it over the weekend, I was, you know, and from the point of view of this event and our talk, thinking like, damn, there's so much going on in this film that feels so directly relevant to how the world has changed in the last 2 decades, right?
Because it's a film easily taken for granted. Can you maybe start with also, since you've read the book,
yeah,
what is the film doing? What is it about? Or like, how is it adapting the literary work of Cormac McCarthy?
It's based on a novel that actually was initially planned as a screenplay. Cormac McCarthy's books, you know, he's a famously masculine writer.
Yeah.
You know, he writes these very hard-edged, like hard-boiled, I would even say, neo-westerns and thrillers, very heavily inspired by the work of like Raymond Chandler and Jim Thompson, James Ellroy, figures like that. They're stories that we feel that we know because we've seen so many westerns and we've seen so many film noirs and detective stories.
Like elementary.
They're elementary American genres that also, in their own way, have become part of our narrative DNA because these genres are about very particular themes, right? So if you can say like No Country for Old Men was written as something that crosses the hard-boiled detective novel, like a crime story, with the Western.
Yeah.
And so the Western traditionally is a genre about civilization overcoming barbarism. It's like, you know, white people come to this new world and they're bringing with them civilization, and it's going to be like a mess for a little while and people will show their worst sides, and we're surrounded by natives, but ultimately the hero, like masculinity and patriarchy, will prevail.
We have John Ford, we have John Wayne Gowen rescuing the kidnapped girl from the natives.
Yes.
So, yes.
And the good filmmakers like John Ford made it ambiguous, but it's still that story, right? It's a story of heroism and a story about progress. And by the same token, the detective story is about like there's something evil has happened and we're going to solve the mystery and we're going to punish the evildoers and restore a moral balance to the universe. So if you think about it that way, and you say like, okay, so No Country for Old Men plays upon our familiarity with both of those things because it's set in the West, and it's funny because it was released in 2007, and we kind of almost hardly notice that it's a period film because it takes place in 1980. So it's like 25 years ago, this is what the world was. Now we're looking back at the film almost 25 years later. But it was a period film, and it's like, it's before cell phones and before the internet and stuff like that, but after the days of the Old West. So it's in Texas, and we have the open fields and the plains, and there's people with guns, you know, and cowboy hats. But so that gives us that sense. And the story is about a guy who is like a classical hero, right? Like a gruff man of the land, who finds a whole bunch of money and he tries to be smart about it. So we like smart people who make smart decisions. So like he's our guide through this. That's Llewellyn Moss, played by Josh Brolin. But there's a whole like world of nefarious gangsters and drug dealers and cartels and hired killers that are all after this money now.
Of course.
And meanwhile, there's Ed Tom, the sheriff, played by Tommy Lee Jones, who's the figure who's supposed to put everything right? He's the classical detective who's going to figure out there's a film noir hero, and can we possibly protect him from this seemingly inevitable doom? And it's interesting watching the film how it also corresponds to another big film from this era, which was David Fincher's Seven.
Exactly.
Which is like also like it's taking the detective and turning it into a horror film, mostly by saying the inevitable downfall, this apocalyptic sense of we live after the end of the world, is a place where detective work no longer carries out its classical function at all, right? At one point in Seven, I think it's Morgan Freeman's character says, like, we're not actually fixing anything. We're not even doing anything. We're just documenting the worst, like people's worst instincts being carried out. And in the same way, Ed Tom, Tommy Lee Jones's character in No Country for Old Men, he doesn't actually do anything. We follow along with him.
He spectates.
He spectates, and he feels like, and that's what the title, of course, reflects. He starts feeling like this country has changed in awful ways. It's become more brutal and alien, and like morality has vanished. But my favorite scene in the film, I think many people's favorite scene in the film, is this moment that doesn't actually have any narrative weight. It's purely symbolic. It's when he goes to visit this old timer who lives in this shack in the middle of the field. And he's like, this shit happened 100 years ago, right? This has been going on forever. This country, it just wears you down, right?
Yeah.
And that's where something clicked with me, where as somebody who is from the United States originally, but who grew up in Europe and mostly in the Netherlands, and who would go there on visits and love to visit the United States because it was such a, it's glamorous and it's like movies and pop culture and all these things. And everybody was always nice to me.
Of course.
And then Trump gets elected and you're like, what the fuck? You're like, what is this country, right?
And there we have it. There we have the T card. And that's also, I think, you were reflecting on this idea of the times. They are changing in indescribable ways. At the beginning, we were saying that many of the films that we're picking in this program have this strange kind of prophetic quality, and this is kind of what struck me the most while watching the film, is how perfectly the Coen Brothers, but also in the way of the acting and in the way of the editing
and the cinematography, right? Roger Deakins, my goodness,
in the way that it really evokes and captures this sense of creeping loneliness and desolation, and how kind of like a sense of structure has poured out of the seams of the country, leaving everybody literally to their own devices.
Yeah.
So to some degree, even though it's a period film set in the 1980s, it's a film you could say about late capitalism, our favorite, combination of words. Because you show people that are lonely, that are desperate to get rich quick, that want that money for many, many reasons, that will do everything to get it because they realize that the old structures, the old ways of doing things, like you said, they don't apply to the new rules of society anymore. And I thought that it was so brilliant how the Coen Brothers do that, because very often if you would make a film that addresses all of these things, you have to do it very outwardly. You have to point at these things and literally, like the joke, this says a lot about society.
Yeah.
But what they do is just let it linger.
Yeah.
Let it exist. And to feel it for yourself, how just disconnected and disjointed people have become.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, I think very strongly embedded by, which you could say is kind of like the Joker almost, the renegade, the kind of like the catalysator of all of these struggles is the serial killer played by Javier Bardem, who brings in a sense of profound, almost existential randomness, also quite literally about will you live or will you die? He's kind of like operating through it in the middle, going to people, possibly killing them, passing things up to chance as well.
What's the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost on a coin toss?
I don't know. I couldn't say.
Call it.
Okay, you mentioned Trump. And it's interesting that this film is pointing towards a hopelessness that a lot of Americans have felt ever since his first, presidential election, which in the time of making the film was not that present yet. Obviously, a lot of Americans, I think, enjoyed a couple of years of, let's say, respite and relief when we had two cabinets of Obama, which was sorely needed after the entire botched, Gulf wars and invasion of Iraq by the Bush administration. As America was going into what should have been a good time, the film is already pointing at how bad things actually will feel for almost everybody living in this country.
Well, in that sense, it's maybe like neo-noir is one of the great terms to describe it, a genre that has, that's been around much longer, that we can see. I mean, apart from the original film noirs that were pointing out how the generation that was supposedly the great generation coming out of World War II was actually, they were all broken men who did not see any kind of future after the horrors they had witnessed. And then a generation later, we get Vietnam. Josh Brolin's character, Llewellyn, is a Vietnam veteran who is sort of getting through life, and he's functional, but he's not emotionally available. And he's very much this kind of old-fashioned American cowboy. Like, he's very snappy, he's very smart. He's not vulnerable in any kind of way. We love to watch, like, trying to figure out how to get things done, because, as I said, he's really smart, but all of his action is translated so effectively into, like, visual storytelling. And I think, like, in reading the book and then watching the movie, it's such a great adaptation because they make all the right choices in how do you take things that are often internal monologues.
And this I wanted to ask, because from Cormac McCarthy, the only book that I read is, of course, the magnum opus,
Blood Meridian,
But what is a stylistic trait of many of his works, which is that his sentences will run very long, that they are connected with a lot of commas, that there will be a lot of this. It's almost alchemic in the way that the language just flows and flows and flows, and it conveys and it does this, and you crawl into this interior space. It's very hard, and a lot of filmmakers have tried or have not succeeded yet, or have brutally failed by realizing the films. A lot of filmmakers have completely stumbled over adapting a McCartney novel. So I'm very curious, what are the right choices that the Coen Brothers made to make it seem so effortless and also fit so seemingly in the body of work that they constructed?
A lot of filmmakers have indeed tried and failed to adapt Blood Meridian because it's such a powerful written work. I mean, the prose is so strong and so unique. But everybody ended up saying, well, it's like adapting James Joyce or something. There's something so specific.
David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest.
There's something so specific about the way it's written that doesn't translate very easily to cinematic, like, narrative. And I think that No Country for Old Men is closer to a novel like The Road, which is one of his most popular novels, when in the sense that it's not very abundant in its prose, it's very sparse and it's very conversational. So there's, like in The Road, there's very little punctuation. There's a little bit of kind of like stream of consciousness, but all of this is very conversational. So a lot of it is Tom monologuing to himself or following Chigurh's thoughts or people monologuing at each other. So it's very like infectiously readable. I was just finishing it on the train. I was like, damn, man, this book really moves, which also, again, is like a telltale sign that it was originally constructed to be a screenplay, but then developed into a novel. So that was the book where the Coens were like, we see how we can adapt this. And the way they adapt it is, for like, one really clever choice that they made was they were working with their regular composer, Carter Burwell. And they were like, what are we going to do with the sound design? And he was like, I think you need like hardly any music at all, which is an interesting thing to say for like a composer, because there's like maybe 4 minutes of music in the whole thing. I think
he was just probably very busy around
He was probably
that time,
busy, like, guys,
and he was like,
just leave it out.
I think you should leave the score, just put my name on it.
The lack of music that is telling you how to feel or telling you when the tension is ramping up focuses your attention on different things instead.
Yeah.
So that, in combination with Roger Deakins' incredible, like, choices in terms of how the camera moves, what kind of scenery it captures, how it places these characters in environments that feel both very spare, but also in the populated scenes, there's always a lot of human activity going on. So it feels like it's a world that is almost post-apocalyptic in the sense that it's empty, right? Yes. But it's not empty of people. It's been emptied out of values, of ideas, of morality. And in that sense, it's almost like you mentioned the term late capitalism, which obviously is appropriate. But I love Anna Kornbluth's book, Immediacy, where she uses the term too late capitalism.
Yes, exactly. It just it didn't hit, it didn't give it.
The Dark Knight, which has a similar kind of, sort of infectiously unique and ambiguous villain in Heath Ledger's iconic Joker. I think Anton Chigurh, is kind of in that league. It's like that kind of a figure of that age. It's very different in the sense that The Dark Knight is very much like a late capitalist novel, which is all about banks and about how labor, no longer matters because it's all about speculation. It's a bank robbery. It's men in suits. Everything about it is kind of financial speculation, which displaces people and makes them feel disoriented. But this is like, there's no real banks or anything like that. All the institutions here seem to have failed. There's just this like bag full of money that everybody seems to be chasing for nothing.
It's just the last bit of money seemingly in the entire country is there and everybody wants it. It's like, okay, the entire country is morally bankrupt, but there's a pot of gold somewhere in the middle. Good luck.
And all that does is kill everybody.
Yes.
Right? It's like, it just kills everybody and for no reason. Like there's this great poetry to it. It's like, those great scenes with Woody Harrelson, like how crazy is he or how dangerous is he? Like compared to what? It's like compared to smallpox, tuberculosis, On the one hand, there's a lot of myth making going on, but it's not the kind of myth making that we associate with either the film noir, or the detective or the Western. It's using the traditions of those genres to tell a story really well. The catharsis that we feel like we're building towards, where we're invested in a character and we want them to be rewarded, or we want them at least to not die or die tragically, right? Even those things are like taken away from us. No, he doesn't have a great moment of insight. No.
Which is a kind of course, a Coen Brothers trait. No, it's a thing that runs through Fargo, but most, I think, iconically and funnily in Burn After Reading with Brad Pitt's character at the end of that film.
I think that's the closest analog.
Yes.
That and Inside Llewyn Davis,
yes.
I think, are the two films in there.
All of these kind of like unexpected demises, all of these kind of like, you kind of grow to love the character even though all of its flaws, and then ultimately, the loss of these structures or the lack of them, will always upend, let's say, the destiny of these people.
And I think Fargo is a really interesting companion piece to sort of look along, to
because
sort
there's
of
still
see this
trust,
in conversation.
of course, in the detective,
And there's trust in the detective. The detective does solve things. The detective does kill the worst bad guy in the end. Or she doesn't kill him. She shoots him in the leg and drives him home in her cruiser, right? And then she scolds him for caring only about money, right? And she represents, Marge Gunderson. She represents humanism. She's like, there are still things worth saving in this world. Like Somerset says at the end of Seven, this world is still worth saving, even though we haven't seen any evidence of it in the movie. But we're still going to hold out that belief. And here, it's just like a little bit of ambiguity to that amazing sort of narrated dream at the end where Tommy Lee Jones sits at the breakfast table, but he's just lost, he's just like dreaming of his father who died when he was much younger than he was. So I'm the older man, he says. And then he's like, I wish somebody would just come and fucking take me. That's kind of bleak. Even his wife, who's just like, she's like, dude, you need therapy. You shouldn't worry about these things too much. But it's like, but I think that's where the film also, having it be this story about these three different men that are all chasing each other in different ways, that all represent a very ingrained idea of what masculinity represents and what it means to us, right?
Here's a couple of ironies, which is that Javier Bardem serial killer, which we both described akin to, Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight. He has become, I think, a very iconic phase of the film. As a matter of fact, endlessly memified after the film came out, was part of the early 4chan days, always as a reaction image. It keeps going, the coin toss that he does, through which people have a 50-50 odds of surviving his very unique weapon of choice, is now also have become kind of like a right-wing meme to, on the internet, to identify a thing and then to say, you need to make a choice. No, make the call.
Call it.
And it's always like just things that suck about society now. So a lot of like right-wing online memesters and trolls have co-opted his call it as like, point at the thing, point at an equally worse thing in their mind, something liberal, something soy, something woke. Call it. How much does it suck? Ironically also, for instance, to go back to Trump, a politician like J.D. Vance was actually literally citing one of the monologues of the serial killer of No Country for Old Men, which is incredibly bleak, in one of his political stump speeches to point at the discrepancies of the liberal politicians in America.
Yeah, sure.
So he's pointing at all of these things. They're doing this, but that's actually, this is actually the collapse of America is there.
Yeah.
So it's very strange how this film is also, to a certain degree, bolstered by a right-wing almost vision of America.
For sure.
And that they've almost find it inspirational to drag things out of this film.
Well, but I think that typifies a particular sensibility that a lot of tough, almost superhuman villains in these like nihilistic or nihilism adjacent films, that they tend to have, that makes them really attractive to far-right politicians who like to draw on pop culture to show that they're also like hip. It's like recently Pete Hegseth apparently thought he was quoting the Bible, but he's actually quoting the scene from Pulp Fiction,
Yes, exactly.
Blessed is he who in the name of camaraderie and duty shepherd the lost through the valley of darkness.
Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness.
For he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children.
For he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children.
And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance
And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance
and furious anger
and furious anger
those who attempt
to
capture and destroy my brother.
poison and destroy my brother.
This idea that you're gonna you're gonna say some cool sounding biblical stuff before you execute some poor guy sitting in a chair.
It's like Anthony Soprano, what happened to Cary Grant and Gary Cooper, the strong and silent type, just this kind of like weird, almost like a priori almost idolization of the great man that came before.
There's two things going on there. Like one is just a kind of functional illiteracy, right? Or maybe we can just say it's the sense that these kinds of texts, these movies, there's not a right way to watch them, right?
Yeah.
They're violent movies about a hard-edged society, and we watch them and we're like, damn, this movie really captures something about the immoral shift that has taken place, or maybe just the realization that it was always like this, right?
Exactly,
That
that's
there
I
was
think
a
the
reality.
thing. It's just picking up on the thing earlier than the rest, but it is there.
It's there.
It just has a more sensitive antenna, to kind of capture it, and then great directors and entire stellar cast and convey it.
If it's Ed Tom's story, which I would always say, like, it starts and ends with him, even though he doesn't do anything, he just watches all of this happen like us, and then he reaches a conclusion, is like, I don't really want to live in this world, right? I thought the world was a certain thing and that I was able to make a difference in it, but I've changed my mind. These events have changed my mind, right? So that's one thing. These movies that have people doing terrible things in cool looking ways, right? Yes. In the same way that The Wolf of Wall Street was made as an indictment of casino capitalism, and it's fully embraced by people who are totally into that world.
I have a very silly aside, but last week I was at a film festival in Kyrgyzstan, in Bishkek, in Central Asia. And I am,
as one is,
you're just there in the jury of a film festival, and I'm walking around town just to explore the city, which is a strange city. It's not very walkable. I'm walking past some streets, see some shops, and there's a clothing store for men that want to dress up in cool business, nouveau riche kind of style. And what do we have as like the advertisements outside of the store? We have an image of Tony Montana from Scarface.
Oh, yeah.
And Jordan Belfort from The Wolf of Wall Street.
There you go.
And that's now a way to advertise. Like, you should dress like him, you know, if you want to be a cool, successful, capitalist businessman.
Yeah.
Then this is the way to go.
Like, if the filmmaker and its star start giving interviews explaining to people that they're watching the movie wrong or they're interpreting wrong and that they're not supposed, they didn't mean to romanticize these characters, then there's something weird going on for sure. And I think that is something that you can describe as a certain kind of illiteracy, but it's also, it's the kind of illiteracy that people are surprised to realize or to find out that Bruce Springsteen's song "Born in the USA" is actually critical of the society. Those things are irrelevant in the end because they're the form kind of trumps the content in that sense, right?
It allows so much. The signifiers are so strong; it can drift everywhere.
So you can watch No Country for Old Men and see it as just an exciting, film where you ignore the bits and pieces that just seem boring to you, like the final scenes. Like, whatever, he ended up talking about the dream. But the kills were really cool, right? Yeah. Even though we were denied the catharsis and stuff like that. So there's that. There's also another thing which started, I think, with Vice President Dick Cheney explicitly embracing the Darth Vader role. Like somebody criticized him for being evil like Darth Vader. And he was like, this is a great, like, or somebody on his staff was like, that's a great opportunity. Darth Vader was a bad motherfucker, you know? Like Jules in Pulp Fiction. These are people who embrace and actively expound a kind of, they want to have a traditional patriarchal hard-edged masculinity. Yeah. And so they will take it wherever they can get it. Right. And there's no point in pointing out to them. There's no, like, it doesn't matter pointing out like you're reading it wrong or that's not actually what it means or it's supposed to be criticism. It's like, no. These are functional icons that people put on T-shirts and hang up in their dorm rooms, you know, like in the same way that people love Travis Bickle. You know, some people do.
I think at some point in our series, I hope that we will find more often, you know, with how some of these films unexpectedly have become part of the lexicon through the internet and the meme culture, right? Because this is not a film, if you would see it at first glance without having ever been on the internet, that you think, oh, that's a film where people on the internet make use of to make jokes, to make edgy content, you know? Yeah. And yet here we have it. Yeah. I find this always very interesting that, let's say, the power of cinema in the 21st century is also somewhat measured by its mimetic potential, right? Yeah. Does it turn into a meme, yes or not? Can it be used
right.
for whatever people want to use it for online? How potent is the imagery in itself? Yeah. Which is ultimately, I think, a compliment to a film. I want to maybe end on a kind of strange reference note as well, which is very contemporary, which is that I don't know a lot of works that really so coherently convey this sense of desolation, or this sense that things are slipping away, that they are collapsing in real time, or that the collapse has already happened and we're catching up. But recently we've both watched major iconic television series, which to some strange degree for me, you know, I was constantly revisiting that in my mind while I was watching No Country for Old Men. And people might be shocked to say that it was season 3 of Euphoria by Sam Levinson. Yeah. Because here we have, you know, for the people that don't know Euphoria, which is kind of insane because I feel
there's
like...
There's 2 people listening right now who have never heard of it. Yeah.
Thank God. Thank you for explaining. What started as just like a deranged, kind of horny, kind of druggy, high school, like mosaic story of all these kids at high school that are partying and doing drugs way too hard for what I was doing on high school at all. I thought like I was smoking weed and it was cool, and then I see what these kids, Zendaya and all of her friends, are doing in Euphoria. I'm like, yeah, I should have, you know, maybe amped up the game. So the first 2 seasons are just high school and all of the problems that come with it. Drug addiction, this and that, sex, blah, blah, blah. Now we have season 3, which is way after, shot much later. The characters have grown up and it's supposedly a neo-Western.
It does feel that way, and it feels like I totally see the correspondence, because I think where in the first 2 seasons, they really were about a community of kids who went to school with each other, and they had like sexual and romantic rivalries and things like that.
They had to go to school.
So it's like, it has a little bit of, I hate to say it, but like Twin Peaks in it, in the sense of like, these are high school kids, but look at all the weird and terrible things that they're up to all the time. Exactly. And then the 3rd season is like a completely different genre. It's like there's no way to keep these characters kind of together. So we're going to end up like inventing some extremely convoluted drug and prostitution scheme where that sort of draws them closer to each other through OnlyFans website plots and drug money and strippers and human, like, you know, trafficking and things like that. That had a lot that did remind me of No Country for Old Men as well, because it's like, how are we watching all these different people and how are they going to end up
exactly? They're never overlapping, but more importantly is that what the series is constantly pointing at as well is there's no money anymore. There's no chance for you to succeed in this life unless you will be ruthless.
Like Zendaya's character every move that she makes, she is forced to make by something else.
Yeah.
So she's like a pawn being pushed across the board. And that's actually a thing that I ultimately kind of liked about the third season, because it's, in that way, I guess, it's also kind of connecting to movies like No Country for Old Men, where it feels like everything is already
premeditated.
There is no free choice, right? If it's all fated in some kind of way.
Then I was putting them in relationship as well, which is like, yes, the distinct pleasure of watching a Coen Brothers film, which is kind of akin to, of course, watching a Hitchcock film almost, is feeling that these characters...
Or Billy Wilder.
Or Billy Wilder. It's like they are like caught in a net, or they are in the slipstream of a thing, and they can't even see it. It's almost like an invisible power pushing and pulling them through the narrative.
Yeah.
And it's also through the effortlessness of the director that it feels like you just have to join them for the ride.
Yeah.
And you know that you can accept that all of the choices that they made, that to some degree they are only because they are responding to a thing that has already pushed them into a situation. Which is some very funny how that works in Euphoria, because it's pointing at the same thing. America has decayed. Morality is gone. There is no money. The only way you can get it is, like, metaphorically, to get that $2 million in cash from No Country for Old Men. That's the only way to be better than the rest.
Well, it's funny because I'm just like, now that we're talking about this, I'm realizing for the first time that maybe the movie within the Coen Brothers canon that it corresponds most closely with is The Big Lebowski, right?
Yes.
Because, I mean, tonally, they're of course complete opposites. You know, The Big Lebowski is like, it's just constantly quotable dialogue. Everything is funny and silly, but ultimately, there's nothing, right? There is no value.
Yeah, we believe in nothing.
We believe in nothing, Lebowski, nothing.
And tomorrow we come back and we cut off your Johnson.
Well, there you have the other big word, you know, it's nihilism.
And it's about characters who ultimately just sort of, they accept like, okay, so nothing matters and nothing that we do has any effect. And so let's go, fuck it, dude, let's go bowling.
Let's go bowling, yeah.
Do you think you can still make a nihilistic film today and it hits the same way? Because I feel perhaps with No Country for Old Men and The Big Lebowski, like you said, they were already pointing to something that we perhaps hadn't quite realized yet. Whereas now with something like Euphoria, it's so naked and blunt and blatant about it.
That's a very good point, because also, you know, what Euphoria's season 3 suffers from is the fact that it's pointing at things we already know all the time. You know, it's like, oh, all the girls are, you know, on the internet possibly making money on OnlyFans. Oh, all the real estate development is not working anymore. Oh, there's a problem with drugs on the streets. Yes, a lot of people know, a lot of people feel it very acutely. In that sense, the film is also only always lagging behind the thing. And I think, again, what makes No Country for Old Men sin and feel so powerful to revisit is just how attuned it was to a thing that a lot of people at that point were not willing to accept yet. Oh, everything is starting to low-key suck, no?
I think also in response to your question, Elliot, this idea of like contemporary nihilism, it feels like the starting point. I think it's weird in Euphoria because it started out as a character-driven, like soap opera-ish, melodrama. So that sets up our expectations in a particular way. And then in the third season, people are disappointed when the characters don't get to sort of succeed and push through, right? Because they're pulled back by this kind of nihilistic, by the dismal tide that can't be resisted. But if you look at, like, I'm thinking right now about like the two big movies that knocked Star Wars out, right? Obsession and Backrooms.
Yeah.
Right? The new kids who make these movies, who come from, you know, they've come up with YouTube stuff and with creepypasta and Roblox. And for them, like it is literally an empty world, right? The Backrooms world is an empty world. And the stories that we tell within them, I think I went to see those two movies as soon as they came out, like they came out the same day. So I'd see them back to back. And it's so funny to watch Backrooms, which is like characters who just barely exist with psychological profiles that are just like, you know, whatever. And the cool thing is they now get to be scared in these weird emptied out environments that feel like digital environments. They feel like the ruins of a lost world. And Obsession is like, that is completely nihilistic, right? So let's take like a monkey's paw narrative. We'll just make it look like Instagram. Like the whole thing is like all Instagram filtered to death is what it felt like watching the movie. Beautifully composed, you know, very Ari Aster. and then we'll just strip everything down, right? We'll just keep, and I was watching it with an audience full of young people, and they were delighted by this idea. They saw every beat coming and just loved it clearly for very different reasons, right? Some were like, this is a movie about girls and how girlfriends keep pushing and pushing because they want fulfillment and they want this kind of validation. And men are awful because they're
making use.
They will take advantage of every single thing. Everybody is awful, but that gives the writers and directors permission to do the worst things with them, right? So the nicest character in the movie gets her face smashed in, and everybody keels over laughing, right? I think in that sense, that nihilism that felt like it was a little bit, disruptive in 2007. Now just feels like, it's Tuesday, right? So it's just another Tuesday.
I think the only film, and I'm happy that you mentioned his name, that really responds very well also to No Country for Old Men, but also to all of the other things we just now discussed, is actually a film by Ari Aster, and it is a massively underrated film, Eddington.
Oh, yeah.
I think that Eddington is prophetic, even though it feels like it's right on the mark at our current time to point at all of the things that what the fuck is going on, and why is everybody being so incredibly performatively deranged on the internet? Why are the left and the right, the sheriff and the kind of like stir makers all clashing over a fictional narrative that actually does not matter, while the actual real thing, the lurking evil, is just happening on the sidelines, and has completely paved the way for it to happen, Here's a film that shows how deranged people have become through the internet. It shows how the internet, to many degrees, is much more physically important for people than what is actually happening in their very own communities in real time. It shows that also this collapse of the old standard of the sheriff finding control, taking control, maintaining order, restoring balance, basically steering the evil away in a linear, narrative. They don't succeed because they actually already too stupid to do it. I thought it was such an incredibly funny and insightful film. And every time now, I still have it when I'm on the internet and I see people, we all know it, that you're on Instagram and you see somebody suddenly posting something, and it can be, very forthright, and it can actually be, to some degree, it can be commendable, a political cause, a protest, or this and that. But just the way in which some things are done so idiotically, I'm like, well, I'm looking at Eddington.
Just before we close, I will come back, though, with I saw those same things, but differently in Beau is Afraid. Right, so that for me, when a movie does those things that Eddington does, which is take like current events and recent things like COVID, and then we'll have the movie be about that. I mean, I like to interpret things in relation to the society and things like that. And so when the movie is doing it explicitly, I always get a little annoyed. I'm like, oh God, we're going to explain all of these things and set up a conflict between those different forces and then watch it ironically. And the thing that I like a lot about, but I've only seen it once, so I can't really judge it. But for Beau is Afraid, which I hated the first time, but then came back to and watched a couple more times. And every time I watch it, I'm like, damn, this shit is amazing. It's like the only way to understand it's not even to make sense of the world, but to experience the world is through the eyes of a complete paranoid schizophrenic.
Yes.
Who is in a constant state of hysteria, which is completely justifiable by the world that we observe around us.
And that's now a recurring meme on Twitter. It's like, we need to apologize to all the paranoid schizophrenic.
Yeah, they were right
Everything
the whole time.
that they were spotting, chemtrails are actually UFO sightings. Oh, the birds are actually drones that have cameras. All of these things are kind of low-key maybe happening.
Yep. As Spielberg, it's going to be disclosed to us someday.
Yes, exactly. So we have to apologize to them. And this is, I think, why these films, they exhume a certain type of nihilism, and they have the same almost, let's say, attunement to the ills of society at the time as they're taking place. And they operate very much to a similar vein in almost the same visual grammar, or make use of the same genre tropes to convey that.
And that's where I'd say that, what I think is most striking, what I think we'll enjoy when we actually sit down with a group and watch No Country for Old Men, is that tension between the very classical form and the sense that is something that generates suspense and excitement and investment and identification with characters so well, but keeps doing it in a way that ultimately just doesn't give us the things that we expect, that we fully expect. I think it's still shocking every time Ed Tom drives into town and is like, oh, that's Llewellyn's body lying there. It's like, no, it's the same thing in the book. It's like we don't get to see the cathartic violence that ends his life that we've been worried about the whole movie, right? Or even his wife's death.
Very simply put, to make it full circle, at the beginning we were wondering, and why to even revisit the film? I think we have found abundant reasons, and also I think the overarching thing around it is just that it was so incredibly pleasing to feel like from the first shot that you can surrender yourself to, the craft, the gaze, the vision of two masters and everybody around them, and that this is actually what the program is about as well, just the distinct pleasure of these films. A celebration of cinema.
Very good.
There we have it. And yes, that's another reason for all of you who are listening to come by. Also talk with us, because as you see, we're quite yappy about all of these things. But come and also discuss this film with you, because it's
and bring in
great.
your own responses. In what way is No Country? Was it a sign of the times? Is it still a sign of the times?
We're about to find out.
Stay connected with us at Celebrating Cinema and Lab by following @Lab111 on Instagram and Letterboxd. Do you love what we do? Support us by leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us climb the ranks of the podcast charts. This was a Lab 111 production, edited and produced by Elliot Bloom, and co-produced by myself, Laura Gomans. Music comes from Hugo Emmerzael, and the artwork is by Studio FFF.